when the first Trump-sanctioned raid, counter-terrorism raid, took place in Yemen last year and went disastrously wrong. Yona's response was to go there, go to the village and report on the ground. But you also work with the Yemen Data Project, and which gathers data of strike civilian harm in Yemen and then remotely analyses and assesses that. So I guess you're seeing it from both sides, really. Just walk us through, those two processes and how you kind of manage the two perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, the first one really is something that I built up over years, really, in Yemen, and it's about having a specialism. Is what it's become for me. I would have said it took me really 2 years of being in Yemen to have a real understanding of local dynamics, politics particularly. I mean, Yemen is infamously complicated. But yes, it's about having that kind of local knowledge, and that really helped me then. I was living in Yemen from 2010 till the kind of beginning of 2015, and then when I left and the Saudi coalition air campaign began in March, it was incredibly difficult to get in the country. And then, of course, for the first time ever, there were hundreds of journalists trying to get into Yemen when there'd probably only been a dozen or so gone in since 2009 when, the Pants bomber thing happened. And because of my relationships I built up in those 4 years, I was able to get into the country, and as a freelancer it didn't cost me a penny to do it, because of those relationships I built up, and took the boat in several times from Djibouti, and able to do work that other people weren't. And that goes to the same issue with covering the Navy SEAL raid that happened in January 2017. That was in a very remote area of Yemen that's not just incredibly difficult to access, but is even more difficult to access when there's a conflict going on and it's right behind the front lines. And also for security reasons, it's kind of Al-Qaeda territory, but there's also an Islamic State presence there. But it was an area I'd visited twice before in the years that I've been in Yemen. I'd covered a drone strike there that had hit a wedding convoy under the Obama administration. So, although I wouldn't say I had a great relationship with them locally, they kind of knew who I was and kind of understood when I asked to go back. And in Yemen, in a place like that, you have to get permission from the local tribal leaders in order to be able to access those areas. There's no really state presence at all, and kind of never has been. So I was able to do that because I'd spoken to the same tribal leaders 2 years before and dealt with them, and they knew it was me that was coming back again. So it's because of that kind of my history with the country, if you like, that I'm able to get to places and access places that other people haven't been able to or can't, and it kind of builds a trust as well locally. It gives you a perspective on the kind of internal biases as well inside the country. When the civil war happens, the media, local media, as you were saying, a lot of this information is being put out, but in Arabic or on local media sites that we're just not picking up, or the information is going out on social media. But in the context of a civil war, that can often be very polarized. So you'll get massive exaggerations about what's happening from one set and the total kind of different narrative from another. But when you've spent a lot of time in the country, you'll know all the different media outlets and sort of what their local biases are, and even down to kind of family names of necessarily what that'll attach them to in the sense of their political views and everything else. And so it's that local knowledge of understanding all those complexities, really. And then the Yemen Data Project is kind of a step removed from all of that. So they're an anonymous group. They have to, for their own safety, remain anonymous, of data collectors who were already collecting, even before the recent conflict started, information on basically everything that went bang in Yemen. And we're doing that through open source. So when the air campaign started, they're gathering information again. This is being done by Yemenis, so they understand the local dynamics and the potential biases and everything else. And that's kind of built into the methodology as well, but it's open source, so it's coming from everything from YouTube, Twitter, WhatsApp groups, local media, local human rights activists, all that kind of thing. And that was then, put into a database, into a spreadsheet, and initially the Saudis thought the campaign would last for 2 weeks, much like many others have thought before them, and that they didn't think that they were still going to be obviously doing that 3.5 years down the line. But that's not being done. They don't have a team of people that can go around the country like we were hearing about now to sort of check particular strike sites. That said, they are also hooked up with organisations like Al Mawatana, which is a Yemeni human rights organisation that is going out to some of these areas. But the thing with the Yemen Data Project is, unlike in Syria and Iraq, there is nothing coming out from the coalition of saying we've carried out strikes here or anything like that. So it's kind of the only point of record, really, that is there for people to use. And it's taken a long time, really, again, for international media or journalists to be able to sort of feel comfortable with using the Yemen Data Project data, just because it is a new thing. It's 3.5 years, but yes, for them to feel confident that this isn't either a front for the Saudis or the Houthis or whatever else. And so now, people are citing the data, and as long as we're transparent about our methodology and the potential flaws of that methodology as well, it's something that's it's a useful resource for anybody that wants to use it. Really, it's something that's put out on the website, and it's freely available to everybody. So yeah.
I mean, those extreme risks that you have to take to get to a place that's been affected by a special forces action, for example. Can you sell those stories? Is it? I mean, is there the interest there in reporting them? I mean, is that proving challenging?
Sometimes it can be, actually. Particularly, when, as we all know, as foreign correspondents now, is that Trump tends to suck the oxygen out of everything else, and going back to the issue of mass disappearances. Being carried out by the UAE in southern Yemen, and this issue of torture and thousands of people disappearing. When I first pitched that probably maybe slightly wrongly, but in January 2017, when Trump had just come into office, I pitched that 5 times and nobody was interested. The AP ended up sort of 6 months later doing a really good report on it, and it was fabulous, and I just saw it and I was like, a relief that this is actually getting covered now. But yeah, that can be really frustrating, and there was a US link to that as well, so it wasn't just a total sort of local issue, as it were. On the Navy SEAL raid, I did think actually it was going to be a hard sell, not necessarily for The Intercept, when I pitched it to them, but just to engage readers on, because I got there sort of 9 days after it happened. It took me another week to be able to get out of the country, 10 days actually. Because the airport was shut down by fighting and one thing and another. It then took me another 5 days to get home. It ended up being a bit of a nightmare journey. And then when I went to write the piece, when I got home, the Americans were then continually striking the village. And so the story was still kind of moving on and moving on. So it didn't end up getting published. I went in whatever it was, the second week of February. It didn't get published until the 2nd or 3rd of March. And I thought that would be quite hard to get people's interest into actually reading about the story still, something that happened at the end of January. But it did actually get a lot of pickup, and I think what I was surprised about was actually the Bureau of Investigative Journalism had already run a piece on it, and they'd used a local Yemeni reporter who'd gone in there. And that was published before the piece that I did, but the piece that I did got a lot more pickup. Perhaps because it was published on a US-based media outlet for The Intercept, but also it's this whole issue of having the foreign correspondent going in and doing it is somehow seen as being, more legitimate or whatever it is than having a local voice telling that story. And that's still something we have an issue, you know, I think we have a sort of cultural issue within in the media and even in media consumption about that. I mean, sure, the investigation that I did, you know, took on different routes with some of the individuals that have been present, and I kind of researched the background of some of them, particularly the women that were linked to Al-Qaeda who'd been present in the village. And so there were different angles to it, to what had been reported by the Bureau, but the Bureau's piece had gone out before mine. You know, the casualty figures were quite similar, but it just got very little pickup. Yeah.